Welcome to the Parts Party. I'm Adriana,
And I'm Ella.
and this is your invitation to hang out with us and our beautiful guests as we explore the lived experience of internal family systems. We want to share in our common humanity as humans who have multiple parts within us, so we can show you what it really is to honour this model of therapy in our own lives. This is a place for IFS nerds, therapists, enthusiasts, or just anyone who wants to get to know their parts and their self a little better.
So grab a soft drink for your little ones, a tea for your manager parts, and maybe something fancy for your firefighter parts. Because all parts are welcome. Today, our guest is Amitayus Syzygy. Amitayus is a transpersonal psychotherapist working primarily through the modality of the internal family systems. Welcome to the Parts Party.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here.
Do you want to share a little bit about you and how you found the internal family systems and you as a person as well?
Yeah, so I came to therapy and I came to IFS maybe in a roundabout sort of way. First, from the spiritual practice as a spiritual practitioner. So I studied religious studies in college. I have a bachelor's degree in religious studies. So I've always been interested in really big questions, but it was more of an intellectual thing for me for much of my youth. And in my late 20s, I went on a spiritual pilgrimage, started practicing yoga, pretty much moved to be living in this yoga spiritual school where we met. And I was very devoted to this way of self discovery, this spiritual practice, and ways of inner knowing. But after practicing very devoutly for 6 or 7 years, I was like, hold on a minute. I have done literally hundreds of hours of work on my heart chakra and hundreds of hours of work on my navel center, and yet these patterns in my life are still showing up, and most obvious in relationship, in the relational space. And so after a little while, I started being curious about other approaches and other ways of working with my, really the layers of my ego, and discovering the way that my system worked and what was at the bottom of some of these patterns. And so that led me through studying, reading, and spending time with a number of different psycho-spiritual teachers, including Prem Baba. I eventually discovered through that practice internal family systems, was working with my own therapist, who I'm still working with. It's been almost a decade, and really exploring the whole question of who I am through this psycho-spiritual lens. And the internal family systems has been just the most helpful and most supportive tool in that process. And for at least the way that it works in my system, when I discover something that I'm really excited about that has impacted me profoundly, usually I want to share. And so I have been offering, well, first I was calling myself a psycho-spiritual coach, got my advanced diploma in transpersonal psychotherapy and counseling maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And so ever since then can use the official title, but I've been supporting others in doing inner exploration, primarily with IFS as the way of mapping the inner terrain and making sense of the inner terrain for 8, 9 years now, something like that.
Lovely. We can very much relate to getting excited and wanting to share the internal family systems. That's how this podcast was born. We love talking about it.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was your journey like, kind of discovering yourself as a collection of parts rather than one fixed personality?
Yeah, I mean, that's To me, the multiplicity of the self just makes complete sense and was one of the reasons that I dove deeper into IFS or was drawn to it. I continue to be surprised at the way that that works, continue discovering new parts, continuing discovering different aspects of parts. So yeah, I think there's somewhere in me that has an idea that there's a fixed finite, and if I keep showing up for my sessions and I keep doing my own inquiry, that eventually I'll run out. But that's an incorrect view.
And Matthias, how do your parts show up for you? Do you hear them or see them or feel them? How do you connect with them?
Yes, so definitely for me, the channels that I'm most fluent in are the felt sense and the visual channel. So the number one clue for me that there is a part active is that there is contraction in my physical or energetic body somewhere. And I know we'll talk about self in a moment, but a little tease for that. The number one clue that there's room for self is that there's spaciousness and relaxation in my system. So definitely the kinesthetic channel is, I would say, the most obvious and the most helpful in my experience as well. I do have visual experiences with many of the parts as well, and some parts auditory. I would say the first exile that I really worked deeply with and resourced has now transformed as he resourced. He chose the name Crystal Magic Jumpsuit Guy, and he actually has a theme song.
Love that.
So the auditory channel does happen sometimes, but primarily the visual and definitely the felt sense and the kinesthetic sense.
And how did it feel different engaging with parts in this kind of IFS lens compared to that kind of more spiritual, as you said, sitting in the heart chakra doing hundreds of hours? What feels different where you went, oh, there's something to this. I want to explore this model.
Yeah, so this specific style of spiritual practice I was doing, and I think a lot of spiritual practice in general can tend towards spiritual bypass, right? Can move towards, I want to get up and out. And that was definitely part of the practice of this style of yoga that I was doing. So it was much more of kind of ignore everything that's happening in the mental emotional being. And to me, that while I had many peak experiences and many amazing, exciting experiences with that practice, and it has, there's lots of reasons that I'm very grateful for it. Definitely, to me, the embodied practice of IFS, of moving towards whatever's there and moving towards it ideally with compassion and curiosity is, in my experience, so much more effective to start with in terms of actually making change and transformation, but also so much more kind and attuned. And a lot of the teaching of yoga is about self-knowledge, self-discovery, but in my experience, this approach and this modality and this vocabulary and way of understanding the self with the model is so much more supportive to actually learn about myself, to actually discover who I am. The parts and the way that they work, as well as the self and the deeper layers.
Beautiful. So we've lost Ella. Hopefully she said she's trying to get back on. So I'll just continue without her. No pressure to my parts that are going, ah. Yeah, so what you're kind of speaking to, this experience of leaning in to the parts rather than that spiritual bypass or void, that method of getting to know parts is often what we call an IFS, following that trailhead. And I'm wondering if you have an example that you'd like to share from your life where you kind of followed a trailhead or a tormentor and it brought you some sort of gift or healing?
Yes. So, I was kind of pondering this question as I knew you would ask. And there's so many. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've had the experience of beginning to work in your system or supporting someone to work in their system, and all of a sudden it's like every part wants the stage.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's sort of that response happening inside. But for me, my deepest wounding and what really has impacted my soul and so much of my personality has developed around is attachment trauma, right? So I lost the majority of my family from the ages of 11 to 13, and experienced this feeling of people that I love being taken away or going away. So when it comes back to the question of the trailhead, the most impactful work for me has been around understanding the protectors around this heart wounding. Various protectors, right? I mean, definitely have had a tendency towards codependency and towards kind of clinging protectors, and then other protectors that want to keep emotional distance, not get too deep in any relationship, right? Protectors that really blame, have blamed past partners. I really apologize to my wife for all of the blame that my protectors have put onto her, that it's her responsibility to show up for my exiles in the way that they need, right? So there's really been many layers of discovering the ways that my system is trying to keep my heart safe, try to get the love and security and support that this heart wound that these exiles need. And through seeing those protectors, being able to go back to the inner child, go back to the wounded ones, and to meet them with the love and the holding and the attunement and the seeing and the presence that they so desperately need.
Ella and I are both couples therapists as well as IFS therapists, and it resonates so strongly with me as well. Hearts work is such a gift for couples work.
Yeah.
And as you said before, it's relating to yourself via these parts and leaning into them. It enables that kindness. And I just heard it permeating. You're able to engage with those parts of you that have been clinging or blaming or doing whatever they can to protect that wound. And you're able to offer that kindness. And then you're able to, in turn, offer kindness over to your wife for, being the recipient.
Mm.
And it's blameless, it's just kind, there's no holding in that statement. And there's something really beautiful to that can really soften conflict when that happens live in couples therapy or at home.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things you just spoke to me is one of, I think, the most profound and impactful parts of this modality is the kindness and the love and the appreciation for the protectors as well. Right? So many, I imagine both of you have experienced so many different coaching approaches or even other styles of therapy. It's about trying to get rid of, trying to push past, trying to reformat. And in my work with IFS, in moving into my own healing journey, there has been a lot of undoing those strategies and those approaches that, in my experience, can be helpful when used in small doses with intentionality, but when used as the general approach, just create more layers of distance from the actual agent of healing, which is that self energy, which is that truth inside.
Yeah, rather than pushing and struggling, it's embracing and getting to know. It's so much more relief in the system when you go that way.
Definitely. So many of my clients, I will invite them, to whatever extent it's possible, offering gratitude or appreciation to this protector. And so many times clients will be like, wow, I have never thought that way. I have only been angry at this part of me, that my critic or whatever, for my whole life. Of course, those parts want our kindness. They need that softness like every other living being.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the past, wanting your wife to look after your exiles, which is so human. We hear that all the time, that people just reach for a partner to heal them, which obviously they never can. In your healing journey, has your wife understood or been part of IFS as well? Do you have that shared language?
We do. Luckily, we have many shared languages. So my wife is also an IFS therapist. When we first met, I made it very clear, I want you to be my woman, not my therapist, which she's mostly listened to. We also have the shared languages of both the yoga school that I was a part of. We met there, as well as like the current spiritual school that we're a part of, which is called the Diamond Approach. So we have multiple shared languages. And I feel incredibly lucky to have that. And at the same time, there's been sometimes, because of and I don't know if the two of you had this experience, but sometimes education can be used by our protectors as an extra level of defense. So there's been, in many ways, it's been supportive and allowed for deepening. And sometimes it's felt like extra layers of resistance between the two of us as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine.
But, on that question of the relationship, as I said, my main trauma is attachment trauma. The main focus of my system is around relating. And so when we got married, there were parts of me, these exiles and other parts that really thought, okay, great, got love locked up, don't have to worry about that ever again, right? Like, that's what this marriage contract says, right? And it's actually been, we just had our 8-year anniversary a few months ago. And I would say the 6 years after that were some of the most painful in my entire life, of the idea, the hope of the exiles that they would have all of their needs met, as well as a deepening awareness, like, recognizing the protectors and the parts that are involved, being able to move towards those exiles. But it's been so painful having I'd say in all of my previous relationships, the relationships ended when it got to the really painful bit. Either I left or they left. And in this relationship, with the commitment, with the container, with the intentionality, it's been beautiful and allowed for healing and allowed for a real turning inwards for that self responsibility and the self holding. And, my wife and I say this frequently. I don't know if I would have done it if our wounding wasn't lined up in the right way, right? Like, it was so painful, but it was like the wounding kept me there despite how painful it was, which eventually has given me the ability to heal and to move through that wounding for the most part. There's still work to do, but the last few years, it's felt like there's the balance in my system is more towards space and less towards the struggle. But it's took a long time and a lot of pain and a lot of enduring pain and a lot of compassion to get to that point.
What a journey. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. We kind of assume once we really work with our parts, everything's going to be butterflies and rainbows and unicorns. But sometimes we really find some work. So,
Yeah. It often makes me think of, sometimes we feel like something goes wrong in our healing journey if even deeper pain's coming up, or even more intense painful wounding is coming up. And often it's like, actually, it's a sign that we're doing something right, because our systems reach this level of safety that they're like, oh, you can handle this next layer. You can handle this really deep thing that all the protectors were causing pain by trying to cling and get away from. Or they're trusting you now to go there. But our system we can sometimes be like, oh no, this is wrong. If I've reached this level, I thought things were supposed to just be healed easily. It's like, no, you're just ready to hold this next layer. We're trusting you to not shy away from it now.
Mm.
I say to my clients frequently, this work is about feeling safe enough to feel unsafe.
Mm.
Beautiful. I'm stealing that.
You're welcome.
Mm. Matthias, share with us a bit about self-energy. We've sort of alluded to it a few times in the chat, and I know it's a difficult thing to put to words, but what does self or self-energy mean for you?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I've had a whole journey with that. And again, kinesthetically is the main way that I experience that, as a sense of inner relaxation, inner space, obviously all the 8 C's, checking in if any of those qualities, capacities are available. Recently, what's really landed with me and seems to be also working well for my clients is actually, rather than using self, I've been using, there's a style of therapy called relational life therapy, by Terry Real, if you know him.
Yeah.
So rather than exile, protector, self, he uses the vocabulary of the wounded child, the adaptive child. So protectors as still inner children. And this really makes sense to me because the protectors are black and white. They're super reactive, right? They don't have this expanded frame of reference, right? So the wounded child, the adaptive child, and the functioning adult.
Mm.
And I actually really like that term because I think self, while I love the fact that IFS is a Western evidence-based modality that is accepted within all the scientific circles, yet somehow has snuck this incredibly spiritual truth in, I find that the term self is so, in some ways, flavorless and broad that it's, at least for me, there was a lot of ideas and a lot of projections as to what that actually was for a long time. A lot of ideas about what is this as opposed to experiencing. And the term functioning adult feels so much more grounded and intuitive to me. So I've been using that. But really, the experience is there's more of me here, and there's a sense of capacity. There's a sense of I can handle whatever life is throwing at me at this moment. It may not be easy, and it may not do it gracefully necessarily, but there is room to engage and to respond to the situation appropriately, whatever that means, right? And sometimes that means not being in the situation, or sometimes it means setting boundaries or whatever it is, but there's room within the system to feel into what is an appropriate response and to respond appropriately.
Is there a sense for you that that's yours or individual and something bigger, or
Yeah,
both?
so here we get into some of the spiritual nitty gritty, right? Like what's self versus no self. There's a lot of terms that I think can be used, or often used interchangeably, that maybe actually have distinctions, right? Like self, jivatman, soul, spirit, right? And I think for me, as far as I have discovered so far, the IFS self is a personal expression of the functioning of my organism when my wounding and the patterns around my wounding, otherwise called the ego structure, are not active, right? When I feel safe enough for my personal expression of beingness to show up, that's how I understand self. And at the same time, that is also kind of the gateway, in my experience, to some other levels of consciousness or ways of experiencing this reality, this world that we live in, where the personal begins to drop away, and there's still the experience of I-ness, but the I-ness now extends beyond the me, right? Extends beyond my physical body and my energy system and the various koshas to include more and more and more. And so certainly my experience is that self is both personal and communal, a shared experience. And I think I have a lot more exploring to do about that.
Yeah, something to really sit with, isn't it?
Indeed. Part of why I'm really saying about the ideas of self, I just had a session with a client before our meeting, and she's a really lovely woman. She's a grandmother, she's in her 70s. And in our session, it became quite clear that she has lots of ideas of who self is. Like if I'm in self, then everything's better, everything is fixed, right? And so just an hour ago, I was working with her to check in on the assumptions, the ideas about that, and to help her be instead curious and to make room to feel and embody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was a big part of my journey at the yoga school where we met, Amitayus, that there was so much trying and so much reaching to get somewhere. And I just had this huge epiphany one day that that whole thing was very much taking me away from who I already was. And I just had to kind of go in a cabin in the jungle for a while and sit with all of that. Yeah, there was so many ideas about reaching somewhere that was really
Yeah.
getting in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's such an important distinction, that self versus self-like parts. And the experience you just described with your client, I had that when my therapist and I were exploring this roadblock I kept having when I was engaging with parts from self, and a self-like part would always jump in. It was this assumption of what was supposed to be engaging with the parts rather than actually just being with the parts. And it's so subtle because it felt like it's love. It felt like it's compassion, but there was this contraction, as you described before, that told me it wasn't self, but was so convinced that it should be self. And it was such an interesting experience having to work with that part rather than have that part be so sure it was self. And I think it's something that so many of us face on this journey is, as you said, the assumptions. It's such an important point to bring up.
Yeah, those self-like parts can be very sneaky and very, especially the ones that are close to self. It's like maybe 5% parts. They're mostly kind of clear, but there's a little bit of density at one end that can be really challenging to bring into awareness and to work with. But yeah, definitely that. It sounds like we have a similar experience, that contraction, that recognition. Like when I feel self, I feel upright. I just did a retreat last week, and all of my yoga training came into kind of like a crystallization, that I actually experienced the difference between I know this is only the voice and not the visual, but the experience between this and this, like a micro movement, millimeters movement of my head had such a profound impact on my experience of who I am. So yeah, really noticing the contractions. And when self is present, there's verticality, there's an inner relaxation, but an inward upliftedness at the same time, as opposed to those self-like parts that there's a contraction. For me, I feel it very often in my arms, my hips, my jaw, my eyes, right? It's just like checking in these places where I store tension. Oh, yep, something's active there. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. As you were describing it, it's the relaxation, that spaciousness, and then just this natural lift in the spine, as you said. And then I was reflecting on that self-like part I was describing, and it was almost like mimicking that bit in reverse. It was rather than spaciousness and relaxation, it was contraction, but then this like inflation of the chest, like I am full, I am tall, was trying to claim those qualities you described that are so just subtly different.
Yeah. One of the first like aha moments with this was I have been told many times throughout my life, often got the reflection, oh, you're really laid back, you're really chill, which is partially true, partially authentic, but I discovered I had a laid back protector.
Mm.
And it was just so paradoxical because there was this part that was all about being relaxed, but there was this contraction at the core of it.
Mm.
And once I discovered that, it really helped create actual relaxation in my system.
What was its positive intent? What was it trying to do for you?
And this was many years ago I discovered this part, but as I remember it, it's trying to be liked, trying to get approval of people. If I'm relaxed, I'm non-threatening, right? People enjoy being around me, then I get more of those connection needs met, etc.
Mm. Yeah. I've met a similar protector that in a similar way, but it's like act just so cool, like you don't care, and then you'll, get away with just, you won't get conflict, you won't get criticism.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
They mean so well.
They do. And again, it's one of the things I love about IFS is really acknowledging the wisdom of these parts
Mm.
and that they were incredibly intelligent responses at the time that they were formed in our system. And they're still doing their very best to help, right? And, when they are included as part of the process, it all works so much better than when we try to bypass, try to skip. And, I've had so many clients that have gone to an ayahuasca ceremony or some other method that for some people can be profoundly healing. And for many people, my experience is these methods of bypassing the layers of protection. Then when you come back to that default level of consciousness, the protectors are like, somehow someone got past me. I need to double down. I need to be even more strong, right? So the exile might have received healing, but nobody has informed the guards on the walls that we don't need to be guarding anymore, right? And so I really focus in my own work and with my clients of going really slow, including the protectors, updating the protectors, right? Checking in with them. Are we actually unsafe? I know you feel unsafe. Let's double check. Is that true right now in this moment? Is that true in this phase of life that we're in?
Mm.
Yeah.
I find an IFS session can feel like an ayahuasca journey sometimes. Like it's very psychedelic when you're in there. The imagery or the things that people experience that come up. And I agree that going straight into the journey, doing that healing work, even if there's not that backlash from the protectors, we sometimes don't really know where we went. Like something happened, but how do you integrate it? Because there was just this kind of imagery and lots of crying. Whereas if we go in with, really following the system, we can follow that back out and have a bit of a map for the future.
Yeah, definitely. I love the mapping aspect. For the first number of years that I was doing IFS, I was mapping all the parts, and even my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, she had her map and I had my map, and then we put them next to each other, and we're like, oh, this part of me activates this in you, and
But
and it was incredibly helpful. Again, being a visual person, to have that way of understanding. And then eventually I just had so many parts and, and they had all changed that the map was unwieldy to keep updating, and I kind of dropped it at that point, but it was very helpful for many years in my practice.
it sounds really playful as well, a nice way to interact with each other.
Yeah, indeed.
And you bring up something interesting there about also how they change. And you mentioned it before, that part that then called itself, and I've forgotten, but what was it? The
Crystal Magic Jumpsuit Guy. I call him CMJ for short.
amazing. Yeah. So that's what he wanted to be called after an unburdening experience.
Yes. So when I first met, and this was like the first exile that I worked with in a really deep way. And when I first met him, he showed up and he was called Panda Guy. And he had this like full panda bear costume. And when he was feeling unsafe, he had the whole thing on. And when he was feeling like the safer he felt, the less of the costume he was wearing. So he could like take the hood off, kind of unzip it and take his arms out. And then if he got scared, he'd like put the costume back on.
So sweet.
For some reason, it was 2 years at least of working with this part before I made the connection that my mother's favorite animal is panda bear. And so obviously, like he's trying to show up in a way that's going to get love and, very cuddly and things. I'm still surprised it took me that long. But yeah, this was the first exile I worked with. He was very much had experienced abandonment, wanting this connection, being pushed away, feeling like there was something wrong with him, that he wasn't getting the love that he felt he needed, that he wanted. And yeah, after working with him numerous times, there was a time when my therapist had said, well, if you didn't have to wear the panda bear costume, what would he want to wear? And instantly, like just that question and all the work we'd done previous was like that spark. And there was a resourcing that happened. And he showed up in my mind wearing a Elvis Presley, like David Bowie rhinestone outfits. And he said, yeah, my name is Crystal Magic Jumpsuit Guy. And he's, I still experience him as an important part of my system. He now will often show up to be there with the other young parts, especially parts like 5 or below. He will show up and he'll be there next to them and offer them support and let them know it's okay. I know it's scary, but it's all gonna work out. We love you. And yeah, he's just this really amazing agent for kindness and play. My system.
That's so moving.
Isn't it so beautiful how our protector parts and even the exiles themselves can be convinced they're this negative thing in the system. And then once we really, really just get to know them with no agenda, they reveal themselves as just pure aspects of self. It's this natural, beautiful expression. And it just happens every time without fail. And I guess that's the beauty of being an IFS therapist is we just sit back. We've got this general positive assumption. We know that what they're doing makes sense, that there's gifts behind it and wisdom behind it. There's self in there, and we just help it express itself in whatever way it needs to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the challenge in there is the with no agenda.
Yeah.
Right? Like, especially, once you've worked with IFS for a little while, I know this happened for me and I see it with my clients that are like, oh, okay, I figured this out. So now I offer compassion so that you change, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
has to be, our parts are such amazing bullshit detectors, right? Like the compassion has to be
Yeah.
real, has to be pure. It can't come with that agenda. And that's the paradox, right? Is like how to actually show up with real curiosity, with real compassion, with real equanimity when that's not what we're experiencing. I'm experiencing suffering. I want to get the hell away from this suffering, right? I want this transformation. I want that release, right? And it's a paradox kind of move.
Yeah.
From one to the other.
Definitely.
Before we finish, would you like to share, Amitayus, a quote or a poem to conclude our chat?
Yeah. One of my very favorite poems comes from Hafiz,
Mm.
and it goes, "The small man builds cages for everyone he meets, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners."
Gorgeous.
And I feel like, in my experience and in so many people I know, IFS has been such an amazing key dropping
Mm.
tool, modality, gift.
And even that brings us back to what we were just saying. It's not the sage going in and aggressively unlocking, just drops the key.
Mm.
It's up to the part to take it.
Mm.
You know, it's beautiful.
Indeed. And who's the sage? Is it the IFS therapist? Is it the guru? Is it each of our own inner self? And who's the prisoners?
Well, this was beautiful, Amitayus.
Yeah, it was really lovely to be here with you ladies. Thank you for the invitation and the conversation. It's been fun.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being part of the Parts Party with Adriana and Ella. We hope you enjoyed being with us, and we wish you many moments of self-leadership. We'd love your support by liking and subscribing, and we hope to see you next time.